Eliezer Forshlager was born in Lovich, which is a town outside of Safechav, which we'll be talking more about in a moment, in 1884, 5644. Okay, so 16 years before the turn of the century. And to his father, Avram Moshe, and his mother, Bluma. His father, interesting, it says, was a champion swimmer and wrestler. And it was a type that the troublesome, sometimes non-Jews of the time wouldn't want to start up with. I won't even read to you everything it says here about his father, Rav Moshe. There's an interesting note about one of his mother's relatives, Bronislav Huberman. It says become an internationally acclaimed violinist. Some would say one of the most gifted of his era, and who predicted in an early time that it was trouble for the Jews of Europe, and persuaded many musicians to leave Europe, and that helped establish the Israel Philharmonic Orchestra, which in effect saved several thousand Jewish lives. And he was, his younger sister, Michel's younger sister, related that her brother would, in the middle of the night, escape, learn undisturbed, walk through the snow, and at 4 already he knew Mishnayos Kalim, which is a very, very difficult chelik of Mishnayos. So we don't have an enormous amount of important facts for us, but I think the most important fact for us, and really another reason besides the ones I listed in our first part of the series of why we should learn about him, was that he was extremely close to the Avnei Nezer, the son-in-law of the Kotzker Rebbe we'll be mentioning again, and was one of the Gedolei Hador Mamish, the Sarah Torah of his generation, and he was from the last Talmidim of the Sachachavar. Who were some other Talmidim? Listen to these names: the Chelkas Yoav, Rav Dan Plotsky, of course, is the Kli Chemda, the famous Perush on Chumash, Shol Moshe Viershav, Mordechai Kalina, author of Michtav Torah, but more famous are Aryeh Tzvi Frumer of Kashiglov, the author of Eretz Tzvi, and of course the Rosh Yeshiva in Chachmei Lublin, Yeshiva Chachmei Lublin, I believe after Meir Shapiro. Meir Shapiro made the yeshiva, unfortunately passed away, I believe, only 3 years later, and then he was the Rosh Yeshiva. So these were some of the other Talmidim over different Tekufot, different periods of the Avnei Nezer. And this is just fascinating. He became, as I mentioned, Lovich was only 16 miles away from Sachachav, so he was in close distance. And from a young age, his father brought him there once, etc. And he felt it was a tremendous chukka, tremendous desire. And at 14, so that was 1898, right before the turn of the century, 12 years before the Avnei Nezer's passing, Rav Michoel himself was only 14, a young past bar mitzvah boy. He was from the last to enter into the inner circle of the Avnei Nezer's Talmidim, even learn with the Avnei Nezer. And here's what he wrote about this period in his life. This he wrote already when he was living in America. We mentioned that Rav Michoel and family eventually made it to Baltimore, where he stayed for many, many, many years. I was privileged to be one of the select students of the great Rebbe, the saintly holy man of God, author of Eglei Tal and Avnei Nezer. Another sefer of the Avnei Nezer is Eglei Tal. No one learns Hilchos Shabbos and doesn't learn the Eglei Tal. I was beloved by him, and his eyes was as one with him. I was beloved by him, and in his eyes I was one with him. And he spoke about me using terms of greatness, but due to my sins, this greatness eluded me, which was probably anibus, but the Avnei Nezer saw who he was. I served him in every way, both learning from him and aiding him in mundane matters for 12 full years. So he was a Talmud Mamish, a Chavrus of Avnei Nezer, 12 years. This person we didn't even know about, who made it to Baltimore, sitting there. We'll see later that Rav Mordechai Gifter, who was a Talmud of Rav Michoel, Rav Mordechai Gifter, as a few other famed names in Jewry, started out in Baltimore. Many, many great people came from Baltimore, of course, but specifically from that period, said that Rav Michoel was like a little piece of Safachov transported from European soil over to American soil. And I received, finishes Rav Michoel, from my master, all that I was capable of receiving. So this is the man, just a little bit. So born close to Safachov at a young Eloi, sounds like he was definitely prodigal. It sounds very much like he was a genius as far as I can tell. Not every Gaon was a genius. It seems like he was a genius, very dedicated to learning, but not from an illustrious family. And he became a student of the Nevzer and really took in from him. And next time we're going to learn about that unique relationship and that amazing person who was the Avnei Nezer and the Safachava from a first-hand witness. Some amazing stories that Rav Michoel himself saw. All that coming up.